I spent 30 years in the tech trenches, and I can tell you that when 7 million units of a system go offline simultaneously, it's not an accident. It's a structural failure. 7 million men have vanished from the American workforce. And while the news calls it an economic mystery, I'm looking at the diagnostic logs of a generation that has been algorithmically hijacked and left without a physical base. 7 million. Let me put that number in context. That's roughly the population of Arizona. If every working age man in the state of Arizona simply walked off the job and never came back, that's the scale of what we're looking at. These aren't retirees. They're not students. They're not disabled. They are men between the ages of 25 and 54, prime working age, who are no longer employed, no longer looking for employment, and no longer counted in any official unemployment statistic. They've disappeared from the data entirely. As far as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is concerned, these men don't exist. But they do exist. They're in apartments, in their parents' basements, in spare rooms, in houses they used to share with families that have since fractured. They're awake at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday with nowhere to be. And the standard explanations, they're lazy, they're entitled, they don't want to work, are not just wrong. They're diagnostically useless. Saying they don't want to work is like saying a crashed server didn't want to run. It tells you nothing about why the system failed. It's a label disguised as an explanation. I want to run a real diagnostic because this isn't a job market issue. This is a sovereignty issue. And the failure modes are specific, identifiable, and this is the part nobody's talking about. Fixable. Chapter 1, the drift diagnosis. This is the drift diagnostic from my book, Breaking the Drift. And it explains the core condition driving the exodus. The drift is a state of mass withdrawal. It looks like apathy from the outside, but from the inside, it feels like paralysis. The man in the drift hasn't made a conscious decision to stop working. He's slid into a default state where not working has become the path of least resistance. And the mechanism is simple. He has zero evidence-based confidence. None. Evidence-based confidence means you trust yourself because you have data that supports that trust. You've set goals and hit them. You've made promises to yourself and kept them. You've attempted hard things and succeeded, or failed, adjusted, and succeeded on the next attempt. Your confidence isn't based on affirmations or self-talk. It's based on a track record, a log of evidence that says, I am a man who follows through. The vanishing men have no log. Their promises kept ratio has been at 0 for so long that their system has stopped generating confidence altogether. And when your confidence is at 0, every action feels impossible. Not hard. Impossible. Applying for a job feels like climbing Everest when you haven't gotten off the couch in 6 months. Writing a resume feels like writing a novel when you can't even commit to making your bed. The tasks aren't actually impossible. But the man's internal operating system has no evidence that he can complete anything. So it assigns a probability of success to every task that's effectively 0. And a system that calculates 0 probability of success doesn't attempt the task. It conserves energy. It goes idle. It drifts. This is not laziness. Laziness is a moral judgment. This is a systems failure. The confidence engine that drives human action requires input, kept promises, completed tasks, verified competence. And these men have had no input for months or years. The engine is starved, and a starved engine doesn't produce output. Calling them lazy is like calling a car with an empty tank broken. The car works fine. It just has nothing to run on. And here's the part that makes it worse. The drift is self-reinforcing. The longer you stay in it, the harder it is to exit, because every day you spend idle is another day without evidence. Another day the promises kept ratio stays at 0. Another day your system's assessment of your own capability drops. The men who've been in the drift for 3 years aren't the same men who entered it. Their operating capacity has degraded, not because they're physically incapable, but because their internal model of themselves, the model that determines what they'll attempt, has been written down to 0 by 3 years of inaction. That's the spiral. And without an intervention that addresses the root cause, the empty evidence log, no amount of motivational content, no just get up and grind speech, and no government retraining program will break it. I want you to understand what a day looks like for a man 3 years into the drift, because the people making policy and producing commentary about this crisis have clearly never talked to one. He wakes up around 11, not because he's lazy, because there's nothing to wake up for. His schedule has no structure, because structure requires commitments, and commitments require confidence that he'll follow through, and the confidence was depleted years ago. He eats something around noon, not a meal, something. He turns on a screen. It's always on, really, because it was on when he fell asleep, and the hours begin to blur. 3 p.m. looks like 1 p.m., looks like 6 p.m. There are no milestones, no transitions, no markers that distinguish one part of the day from another. Around midnight, the weight settles in. That specific heavy feeling that's not quite guilt and not quite sadness. It's the system generating an error report that nobody reads. He falls asleep telling himself tomorrow will be different. It won't be. Because different requires a kept promise, and his system has no evidence that he keeps promises. So the commitment to tomorrow is dead before he finishes thinking it. That man isn't a moral failure. He's a system in a degraded state. And degraded systems don't repair themselves through willpower. They repair themselves through protocol, a specific sequential set of inputs that rebuilds the architecture from the foundation up. Chapter 2, the hijacking. Here's where it gets darker, because the drift doesn't happen in a vacuum. The men aren't sitting in silence, staring at walls. They're being captured. This is cognitive security from my book, Fortress of the Mind. The algorithmic capture of human attention as a substitute for real-world competence building. The vanishing men aren't doing nothing. They're doing plenty. They're gaming for 6 to 8 hours a day. They're consuming pornography as a dopamine substitute for real intimacy. They're scrolling social media feeds that generate a simulation of social connection without any of the friction, vulnerability, or growth that real relationships require. They're watching hours of content about other men succeeding while they themselves attempt nothing. These activities aren't leisure. They're digital proxies, synthetic substitutes for the real-world experiences that generate evidence-based confidence. Gaming gives you a proxy for competence. You level up, you achieve goals, you get the dopamine reward of success without generating any transferable skill in the real world. Pornography gives you a proxy for intimacy without requiring the emotional risk, vulnerability, or social skill that real relationships demand. Social media gives you a proxy for community without the accountability, reciprocity, or genuine investment that real friendships require. And every hour spent consuming the proxy is an hour not spent building the real thing. Every dopamine hit from the synthetic substitute reduces the urgency to pursue the authentic experience. The man who gamed for 8 hours today had his competence craving satisfied, his brain registered achievement. But his actual competence didn't increase by a single unit. Tomorrow he'll wake up in the same position with the same empty resume, the same empty evidence log, and the same algorithmic feed ready to satisfy the craving again without requiring him to build anything real. This is capture, not metaphorical capture, architectural capture. These platforms are designed, I know, because I spent decades in the tech world that built them, to identify your psychological needs and serve you the cheapest possible substitute at scale. The need for competence, here's a video game. The need for intimacy, here's pornography. The need for purpose, here's an algorithm that will show you content about purpose for 11 hours a day without you ever having to pursue any. The platforms aren't failing. They're functioning exactly as designed. And the 7 million men are the predictable output of systems optimized to capture attention at the expense of human development. The analog anchor, 1 hour of zero input silence per day, was designed specifically to break this capture cycle, to create a protected partition where the algorithm can't reach, where the dopamine substitutes can't satisfy the craving, where the man is forced to sit with the discomfort of his own unmedicated reality and hear his own operating system report what it actually needs, not what the platform wants to sell him, what he actually needs. And for most of these men, what the system needs is depressingly simple: evidence. One kept promise, one completed task, one thing built in the real world that their internal model can log as proof that they're still capable of action. Chapter 3, the Fragility Trap. Even when a vanishing man starts to break the drift, when the first flicker of I should do something surfaces, he hits a wall, and that wall is financial. This is structural stability from my book, Iron Logic, the chaos buffer. And for the vanishing men, it's the trapdoor. Most of these men have no financial runway. Zero savings, depleted accounts, maybe debt. Many are dependent on family, disability payments, or informal arrangements that keep them fed and housed but provide zero foundation for a career restart. And here's the cruel mathematics of reentry. Starting over requires a period of investment, training, applications, interviews, the weeks or months between deciding to re-enter and actually earning income that a man with zero financial buffer cannot survive. He knows this. That's the trap. He runs the math in his head, and the math says, if I start applying for jobs, I'll need interview clothes I don't have, transportation I can't afford, and the ability to go 60 to 90 days without income while I find and start a position. I have $900. The math doesn't work. And the math is correct. Without a chaos buffer, the risk of re-entry is structurally unsustainable. Not emotionally, mathematically. So the man stays where he is, not because he's given up in some grand existential sense, because the arithmetic of re-entry doesn't add up and nobody's helping him restructure the equation. The government offers retraining programs that take 6 months and pay nothing during the training period. The self-improvement space offers advice that assumes a financial baseline most of these men don't have. Just start a side hustle assumes he has $200 for tools and hosting. Just upskill online assumes he has a functioning laptop and 6 months of patience while the credential generates no income. The chaos buffer protocol starts smaller than most people think. It starts with $50 a week from wherever you can find it. A gig, a sale, a reduction in the one expense you can control. $50 a week for 12 weeks is $600. That's not a career change fund. But it's the beginning of runway. It's the first data point in the evidence log that says, I can accumulate resources. And for a man whose internal model says he's incapable of generating anything, that first $600 is more valuable than a $10,000 retraining grant because he built it himself. Chapter 4, the competence gap, the final piece. And the one the culture gets most catastrophically wrong. This is the competence audit from my book, Competence Cure, and it reframes the entire crisis. The standard narrative says these men have a mental health problem. They're depressed. They need therapy. They need medication. They need diagnosis. And some of them do. I'm not dismissing clinical depression or genuine psychiatric conditions. Those are real and they require professional treatment. But for the majority of the 7 million, for the men who aren't clinically depressed but are functionally paralyzed, the diagnosis is wrong. They don't have a mental health deficit. They have a mastery deficit. Their anxiety isn't a chemical imbalance. It's an accurate readout from a system that's correctly reporting you lack the skills to navigate the environment you're being asked to enter. The anxiety is a signal, not a disease. And treating the signal as a disease, medicating it, therapizing it, diagnosing it with a label that turns a training gap into an identity, makes the problem worse. Because now the man believes he's broken rather than undertrained. The competence audit says, identify the specific skills you're missing, not in the abstract. Specifically, can you hold a conversation with a stranger for 5 minutes without your voice shaking? If not, that's a training gap, not social anxiety disorder. Can you show up to the same place at the same time for 30 consecutive days? If not, that's a consistency gap, not ADHD. Can you do basic physical work for 4 hours without collapsing? If not, that's a conditioning gap, not chronic fatigue. Each of these gaps is closable. Each of them responds to training. And the training doesn't require a degree, a program, or a $10,000 investment. It requires the man to start at the level he's actually at, not where he thinks he should be, and build one competence stack item at a time. Physical conditioning, basic trade skills, conversational ability, financial literacy, sequential follow-through. These aren't personality traits. They're trainable capacities. And for every man in this exodus who's been told he's broken, the corrected diagnosis is simpler and harder to hear. You're not broken. You're undertrained. And the gap between where you are and where you need to be isn't a chasm. It's a staircase. But you have to take the first step, and nobody is going to take it for you. I've seen what happens when a man accepts this reframe. I had a mentee, 31 years old, out of the workforce for 2 years, diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and prescribed medication that dulled his affect without changing his situation. When I ran the competence audit, the picture was clear. He hadn't done physical work in 4 years. He couldn't sustain a conversation with a stranger without his heart rate spiking. He had no trade skills, no financial literacy beyond checking his balance, and no evidence of sequential follow-through on anything since his last job ended. We started at the bottom, walking for 30 minutes a day, a physical commitment he could keep at 100%. Then a brief interaction with a cashier or barista each day, not a conversation, just a normal human exchange that his system could log as a successful social interaction. Then a free online course in basic electrical work, 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Within 60 days, his promises kept ratio was above 80%. Within 90, he was volunteering on a Habitat for Humanity build site. Not for altruism, but for live reps, real tools, real tasks, real feedback from the physical world. Within 6 months, he was employed, not in his dream job, in a job that proved to his own operating system that he could show up, perform, and get paid. The anxiety didn't disappear, but it dropped from paralysis to manageable background noise because the system was no longer reporting an accurate skills deficiency. The gap was closing, and the signal quieted. That's the investigation. 7 million men didn't vanish because they're lazy, entitled, or mentally ill. They vanished because 4 systems failed simultaneously. Their confidence engine ran dry because they stopped keeping promises to themselves. Their attention was captured by digital proxies that satisfied their cravings without building their capability. Their financial base was too fragile to sustain the risk of re-entry. And their mastery deficit was misdiagnosed as a mental health condition, turning a training problem into an identity. The sovereignty OS stack is the re-entry system. Start with the promises kept ratio. 3 commitments a day, 100% completion, rebuild the evidence log, install the analog anchor. 1 hour of 0 input to break the algorithmic capture. Begin the chaos buffer. $50 a week, 12 weeks, build the runway. Run the competence audit. Identify the specific gaps, start the training. Build the competence stack 1 skill at a time. These protocols don't require money, connections, or permission. They require the decision to start. And that decision is the first line of code in the operating system these men are going to rebuild. 7 million men are offline. The system that put them there is functioning exactly as designed, but the protocol that brings them back is available right now to anyone willing to install it. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. It keeps the motor running, and if you'd like to learn more, check out my books on Amazon or click the links below.